I'm so happy to be here. John, first of all, how are you guys doing? How are you? How's Susan?
Yeah, we're good. We're uh, sheltering in place still since March, and everything's okay. Thank goodness we're healthy and able to do this. Unlike a lot of our favorite musicians, that might be having a hard time right now because
Yeah,
it's hard to not work for 6 months.
yeah, yeah. So, and how are you using the time? Like all this chunk of time?
Well, I'd like to say I've written four symphonies and have mastered the didgeridoo, but I'm doing the same stuff I always do in between gigs. I'm practicing and hanging out and practicing some more. And I've been exercising more than usual, which is nice. That's because I have
Nice.
more time. I mean,
What
nothing.
have you been?
I mean, this is not. I'm not talking about any kind of bodybuilding. I've just been, riding my exercise bike and stuff. And I've just hanging out here in my little town up in Westchester, New York, and just waiting. I'm getting a little bored, to tell you the truth.
So, to keep to keep the boredom away, first of all, I want to talk about this.
Ah,
First of all, congratulations. It's nighttime here, so I can drink. It's
yeah,
not,
a
not
little
3
early here.
p.m. EDT.
A little here, Dekel.
This record means so much to me for so many reasons. First time we met was actually when you guys recorded the live album, and I literally went and transcribed the whole album
Oh,
and would practice to it a lot. But I think the thing with the trio thing with Swallow is it's like 40 years now since Shinola and Bartok with
wow,
Nussbaum.
long
It's
time.
really
Yeah.
like um and I think there's something about I mean it just how do you keep that kind of relationship? How do you keep it interesting for 40 years to play with someone?
Well, those guys are just so good that they're interesting to me the way they play and the way they think about music. Uh, and I've been lucky to get them to play with me. And of course, we all do other stuff in between and all. Um, and I think that there's just such quality there on their individual musicianship of those guys that they certainly keep me interested and challenge me. So I have to try and come up with something. Um,
What
and
happens what happens in the thing when you guys hit the first note? What happens after 10 years, 20 years, 30 years?
well, it's home. Um, I'm so used to the way those guys play that I rely on that to make the music interesting. I feel like I can just coast actually, which is probably dangerous, you know. But no, I, it's the same as with any group. You have to listen. But there's something about the familiarity of knowing people that makes you feel at ease, and I always have to make myself listen though, because my own tendency sometimes is to just to not remember that might be the most important thing to be part of a group and not just play on top of it. So but when I hit, I mean, one thing that with that group is Bill Stewart, his playing, he just feels so good, and Steve together, so the groove is so nice that it makes you want to play. That I can definitely say is always happening.
And you guys also found a way to keep it, which is actually one of your trademarks, to keep it to kind of keep the same lineup in interesting ways. Like you had a thing with Matheny and you had a thing with horns, and then
Yeah.
you went all acoustic with the same lineup plus horns,
Hmm.
and you added
Trying to mix it
Goldings.
up. trying to mix it up. I mean, if I just was on my own in the perfect world, I'd probably make 100 trio records trying to get it right. You know what I mean? Just because I know that you could get better, but when you think about making an album, you think, well, I got to make this one a little different, and the record companies, of course, uh, would like it if you would do something that would make that record stick out from the other records you've made. So, and I did the stuff with horns, that but featuring the trio, and that was great for me to get to try writing, and then to get to play with Pat, that was so. It just different stuff came up, and I thought, well, who am I going to use on this project I wanted to do? And it just seemed perfect to use Bill and Steve.
What was it like to do like because you also did a thing with Frizzell with Mark and Erskine for a while.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean that,
We did a bunch of
and
yeah.
there are a lot of anyone that played at the 55 can see the picture of you and Stern playing there. I mean that two guitar thing was always part of your
Yeah.
musical life.
I guess that's just the way it is with guitar. Two guitars work really well together. The other guy comps for you, and I mean, it was two pianos. That's probably too many notes, right? But two guitars, one guy can be the single line hot shot, and the other guy comps for him, and it works out nice. And I've always enjoyed that with good jazz guitar players. And yes, doing it with Bill Frisell was incredible. That was Mark Johnson put that together with Peter Erskine, and we were lucky because we got to do gigs and stuff, and I got to look into those musicians' worlds and check out the way Bill played the guitar. And Mark Johnson is uh, actually really underrated because he's so great, and Peter Erskine we know is great. Yeah.
So I'm coming back to Swallowtails.
Yeah.
So you guys you did all of that different things with the trio, and you did a million other things.
Mm-hmm.
But then this thing feels like almost like one of those 50s sessions where you get it kind of sounds like you just kind of played one day and that's it. I mean,
Well, that's what we did, Dekel. We just went in and did it quickly. I was actually, I paid for it myself. I just went into the NYU studio with a guy I knew was a good engineer, Tyler McDermott, and I just wanted to record us playing Steve's music, and I wasn't sure, that it was going to come out actually, and so we picked some tune. I picked the tunes, and I picked the tunes that I knew. These are like standards, right, for guitar players, and I knew
and
all of them from Steve from many years before.
and these are things that you guys have played like in sound checks or
Yeah.
because you
Well,
guys
yeah, we played for years and years, and with the trio, it's usually been my music, and that Steve wanted it to be my music and all, but I knew his tunes and loved his tunes, so we would always play some on gigs and at sound checks and everything. We do all these tunes except for maybe one or two we'd played before, so we didn't have to rehearse them. I got together with Steve. I had forgotten this. He reminded me, but he came over to my house just to make sure we had the same changes on his tunes and stuff. We did it all, did the record in 4 hours. We just we didn't listen to playbacks, which helps.
wow
When I listen to playbacks, I like think, oh, I've got to do something. I don't sound good enough. And it actually makes me uptight sometimes. So generally, I don't like to listen to playbacks too much. But when you're working on new music, it really helps to make sure that it's in the right direction. But this wasn't new music. This was like playing a record of standards. We knew
yeah
the
yeah
song, so we just did it.
So when you say making 100 trio albums and getting better, what does that mean to you? Getting better at this point? I mean,
Well, here's the thing. The history of jazz is really long, and it's very developed. And when you really look at the level the way the great jazz players from different eras have played and how great it was. And it's great because we can hear the recordings, you know. That makes me, and I think all of us, you know, realize you just have to keep working to try to get to some of that stuff, you know. Try to get, and then when you have a good night and you say, wait a minute, oh, it's sort of there, you know, but it's never like, well, you have a good night and it's going to be like that forever. You know, the next night you might not have that. You probably won't. So,
But,
you
but
know,
you
just try to get consistently better, and certainly playing the guitar is a lifelong study, just the instrument, you know. But in jazz music, maybe in all music, interpretation and craft of music is so important that it seems to be an endless study.
and so you guys are recording in 4 hours, and it's just playing, going home. I always get a sense that no matter which label is on, no matter which setting is on, if it's almost like if it could be a guest, it could be, you always have a very, it's almost like the way Miles was, that he could be in the quintet or with Gil Evans, or he could be with an electric band, and it always sounded like him, and it always had that personality and that sound. And I feel the same thing with you, that it could be with Medeski, Martin, and Wood, and it can be with the trio, and it could be, and I think for me the biggest representation of that is the Quiet album,
Mm,
where I mean, I don't think anyone sounds like that. It's a bit like you, and it's almost like
thank you so much.
what, any tips to
Well,
get,
you know, you said Miles Davis, right? And yeah, he's my idol, my, and I got to play with him and know him a little bit, and I loved his music before I ever played with him and everything. But you know, I really learned a lot from him, and you know, it's all the jazz personalities, you know, and the greats of the music had that uh, individuality, and you know, we all do. We all have our own sound, you know. It's just inside us, and we just might not know it, you know. And sometimes I think. You know, I've always been a fan of how it worked, you know, with uh, a lot of times. I mean, if you look at Miles, he couldn't be Clifford Brown. You know, Clifford Brown was right there at the same time. It was amazing what Clifford Brown played on the trumpet. Miles was something else completely, you know, with a completely different sound. And I think, you know, the fact that there was a Clifford Brown in the world and Fats Navarro and Dizzy, you know, made Miles go kind of a different way. And he was really smart about that because jazz invites individuality, you know. So
I do
I
feel
always knew that. I knew that sort of inside. So then I said, it's okay that I can't do this or that on the guitar because I could develop something else, you know.
I kind of feel that there was a point with music education that that emphasis was it's not as strong anymore. Like I think that my generation is really struggling to find that, and I think we're coming to it at a far later age. I
Yeah,
mean, for
maybe.
my age group and my peer group, there were a bunch of us in New York playing day in, day out, and we all kind of blossomed. I mean, a decade after the generation before us.
Well, you know, part of it, man, is that I mean the music is kind of older now. I feel lucky that I was there at a time when guitar was really developing. Me and Pat Metheny and Bill Frisell were kind of, you know, influenced by Kenny Burrell and Jim Hall, of course, but also by Mick Goodrick and John Abercrombie, who played this kind of light setup and played legato. And so we all kind of, you know, were coming right out of that, and there weren't that many guitar players around. Mike Stern was too, So now you guys, your generation, there are so many players, and
Yeah.
it's in a way you're dealing with the same material that we were dealing with. You know what I mean? And I think it's just there's this historic thing that goes in waves, and I feel lucky to have been there in the 70s. I mean, a lot of people hated fusion. People hated guitar. Wynton Marsalis still won't play with, guitar and stuff, but I feel lucky that I was there in the fusion years because it made for a whole different way of playing jazz music on the guitar. You know what I mean? Does that make any sense?
It makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. So I have to tell you that, coming back to what we kind of talked in soundcheck, that for me, I brought a bunch of records to kind of get your input on, but one of them is Sonny Rollins' The Bridge. It was just Sonny's birthday right now, and um, I think that Jim invented a way of comping in a modern way that, for me, you kind of took it to a whole new universe. Like I
Well,
always,
I just copied him because I had the bridge and I had the records that Jim made with Paul Desmond. He made a
yeah,
bunch of records, quartet with Paul Desmond,
an art
and
farmer.
Art Farmer as well, where there's no piano and he was the comper, and it was modern kind of, 60s bop influence, but standards and everything. And you really got to hear Jim being an accompanist. And I just that's the way I learned to play, from listening to those records. And so yeah, I mean Steve, when he first heard me, said, "Oh, you're trying to comp like Jim Hall," and
I,
that
I, I,
because Steve had played with Jim, in the '60s. Yeah,
I don't mean to, I don't mean to say anything about, Steve's word, but for me, you're completely different for two main reasons. The voicings are completely your own,
hmm
and you always comp like a drummer. It's almost like a snare drum and the cymbals for
yeah.
me.
Well, yeah. I feel like my study of rhythm, has been from listening to jazz drummers. I'm a fan of jazz drummers, of Elvin Jones and Roy Haynes and those guys, and listening to them, and I try to play like that. And part of that is just having, man, shitty rhythm to begin with. So I had to really work on it.
Um, so I'm going back to the sound and the comping and the instrumentation. For me, that your whole quartet universe, I think that was a huge milestone in jazz. I think it's coming out of the Gramavision years, which were um they
Huge.
fit within that time. They really they in many ways. But I think when you came out with the quartet with Lovano,
Yeah, yeah,
it
right.
was a completely different world. I mean, this was like creating. I was too young, but I imagine that would have felt like when the Ornette Quartet came on the scene. I mean, it's just a completely new sound and a completely new way. And when I came to New York, everybody was always already trying to play like that for like 15 years or so.
people
And
people did listen to that group, and we never thought about it as anything, because I'd been playing with Joe since we were Berkeley students, on and off, and it was just a quartet where I wrote some tunes, and you can hear this, that some of it's coming out of Ornette kind of, or modern tunes like that, and it was just guitar playing behind a saxophone, and very much indebted to what Jim Hall had done, but I think sounding completely different too, because I was always coming out of something else too. Yeah.
uh, so what did it feel like at the time? Because that those three albums
Didn't
are
feel
huge for me.
it's funny because we didn't have that many gigs. We couldn't get that many gigs. We would play, and um, I mean, we would go to Europe, and Europe was okay. Thank goodness. It's always been better, but we didn't have that many gigs around in the States, because my other band in Gramavision had been kind of well received in that other world of kind of fusion, and so that thing, when I played with Joe, that they didn't want that, so we didn't. it didn't ever feel like we were doing anything. It
It's
was
so
it was
funny how it's
mhm.
so funny how it seems completely different a decade or two after. I mean, from
Yeah,
my
at the
generation, it seemed
time,
like
listen, man, this is jazz music. It's not popular. You know what I mean? I bet any era of jazz has been, we absolutely worship it. The stuff that came before us. I do, man. Charlie Parker, Coltrane. I wasn't around for bebop and for Coltrane's music and early Ornette. You know, I heard him later, but so I just worship that stuff. But then I talked to some of the older guys. It's funny, and Steve Swallow, my friend, he would tell me about playing in starting in the 60s, like with the Paul Bley trio,
yeah, yeah,
which don't we all just like eat that stuff? I think, how did they do that? Here's the innovative stuff. They were playing in little tiny coffee houses for tips. They it was, they barely were. Here's another one for you. When Sonny Rollins wanted to contact Jim Hall to make the bridge,
I this story I know.
story, yeah, neither of them had phones.
Yeah.
Could afford telephones, so they had to go to a payphone and call some bar that took messages for Jim Hall, and they almost weren't in touch with each other. So we have to remember. Uh,
Actually, Jim told me that he left a note in his mailbox like at his entrance. Like he just went to the mailbox, left a note. Just, I'm looking for you.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, couldn't afford a phone. I mean, that's something else. Jazz is always, this kind of music. There's not a lot of money involved. I feel very lucky that I've been able to live a middle class life with my wife and kids, and they went to college and everything. You know, I mean, and that's what's so beautiful about all the musicians. Like we're talking about Jim Hall, who was the most accessible person as a human
Yeah.
being. I mean, I think he would probably be sick of all the guys wanting to talk about his famous records and stuff. But um, you know what? Jim made all that music and then took a gig on a television show, the Merv Griffin TV show, which had
Yeah.
like three guitar players and stuff. It was a commercial gig. He took that because he needed the money.
Yeah.
Playing jazz wasn't cutting it, which is hard for us to imagine. At the same time,
Yeah.
we made the bridge and the records with Bill Evans and all.
Yeah, 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 of course, of course. I don't think he ever spoke to me about gigs or records or anything. I think he was just making jokes, talking about life. I don't think
Yeah,
all those times.
he
I
didn't
don't think.
want to. He didn't want. I tried to get him to. I tried to pick his brain as a fanboy, and he wouldn't have any of that.
But that kind of spoke volumes to me about his personality. I
Yeah.
mean, in a world where most people are so happy to talk about themselves, he
Hmm.
was just that to me meant so much.
Well, there's
So
something about all of us as musicians and all the guys that practice all the time and realize how great the music is when it's performed by these geniuses that have already done it.
yeah,
And that'll make you humble. And you know what? I mean, Miles Davis, for all his talk, because he would say stuff that would get in the press and people got the wrong idea. He was very humble and very hard on himself of his own playing. He was also hard on other people and what they played. But no, man, he would, I remember him saying, being really thinking he didn't play shit that night. I remember that.
yeah. Uh, that Colombia just came out with that box set where they're rehearsing the tunes and they're speaking about the tunes during playbacks, and that is unbelievable. Too, you get a completely different side of Miles
Yeah.
as opposed to whatever press was or
Yeah,
um,
I mean, he used the press. He was a very smart guy and everything, but he was just trying to play the horn and play the music, and he had great respect for what had gone before him, and he knew how great it could be. I mean, he told me, when he was young, he got to play with Charlie Parker. And that just blew his mind. That just like set him up for life.
so. Speaking about playing with an absolutely walking titan, another huge album for me that I wore an actual CD I listened to much. I had to get a second CD. So Near, So Far with Joe.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
What
Well,
was it like?
I'm a Joe Henderson fan too.
I know.
I love Joe Henderson, and luckily, he played around a lot. Um, so when I was, in my 20s, I would go hear him. I wore out his records, that stuff in the 70s, and I tried to steal licks from Joe. I've never been a big transcriber, Dekel, at all, but I would steal like little passages from Joe and try and get. He always seemed so funky as well as so progressive, and I just loved it.
Also, I also thought that there's a side in his writing that I can hear in your writing as well. It's hard to explain.
I'm a fan. I loved his tunes, didn't we? And those early Joe Henderson on Blue Note, him and Kenny Dorham, and the tunes that he wrote. Yeah, the greatest. So when I got a chance to play with him, it was, and I sort of had hung out with him a little bit, and he was a interesting human being. He was really smart, and I would sit and
Oh,
listen to early
always seemed
CDs.
like he had a regal quality to him.
Oh yeah, he was regal, and I'll tell you, when we made that record, So Near, So Far, I didn't play with Joe that much. I made a couple of records and then did some gigs, but I wasn't a member of his band. It would always be special things that they put together because I had my own stuff happening at that time, and I couldn't, so. Um, when we did that record, So Near, So Far, we had a rehearsal, but it was the most interesting rehearsal because all those songs.
One rehearsal? It was
Just
one rehearsal?
one rehearsal. Now it was cool because it was all Don Sickler
Yeah, I was going to ask. He
arranged
did the charts?
arranged the music. This was all Miles tunes, so he had talked with Joe, and they had decided on which Miles tunes they would do. And I think Joe knew the tunes already, and Don Sickler wrote them out and had little two-horn virtually arrangements for guitar and tenor, and where a guitar would be the other horn, and so Don Sickler really, and we had one rehearsal where we looked at the tunes, and I had gotten the music beforehand, so I'd been shedding it, but we didn't really play. Joe just played the piano, and he looked at the changes to the tunes, like he would real slowly. He went through, milestones and So Near, So Far, and these songs, and he slowly played the changes at the piano. It said, oh, look, okay, it's F major to E flat major to D minor, and, stuff like that. And he was going so slow. I thought, wait a minute, why is he doing, but he was just really, really looking at the changes to each tune. And then he said, that's it. We're not going to play. I just wanted to just look at him with everybody. And then the little arrangements were there on the paper. When we got to the studio the next day, he was ready for bear, and we just did, like, the first takes were mostly was first takes because
Wow,
he was
wow,
so
wow.
on. Joe was so. I think we would rehearse the head, and I had looked at it, and Dave Holland and Al Foster had their shit together, and played it perfectly the first time, and then Joe just took off, and he took, like, all these choruses on these tunes, and it was just a lesson right there as at how to be prepared, and it was a wonderful experience.
And what were the gigs like?
Same thing. We just played those tunes, and Joe just played, man. It just flew out of him.
That and the first three albums on with Lovano, that literally every time I ever comped, I need to send you a check for that, for those
Well,
four things. I
um,
mean, Jesus.
oh, Dekel, thank you so much. Joe Lovano is another huge influence in my life, getting to play and know Joe. And I mean, he's a really, really special musician. He's so intuitive, um, and such a jazz musician. Jazz
Yeah,
was jazz,
that's the epitome of jazz.
and it's the real deal. When I remember he told me when he was a little kid, like I don't know, fourth grade or something, they had show and tell. And the other kids would bring in, I don't know, a fire truck or their favorite toy. Joe brought in a Rahsaan Roland Kirk record to show
Ah,
the other kids, look at this guy, he plays two horns at once. Joe started with jazz, I think, from the beginning.
yeah. I
And
think his dad knew Jim Hall as well. I think they were friends.
Jim was from Cleveland, and
Yeah.
Joe's dad knew they were friends. And the rest of us, started out with kind of the Beatles and the Beach Boys and stuff and the 60s rock. Joe didn't even know that happened.
So do you have a moment where you went like, bling, this is my future?
I just wanted to play when I was a kid.
When you say it started with the Beatles, what
Well,
was it like?
that was because when I was 11, I got a guitar, and that was, in 1963, and folk music was big, and rock and roll was a thing, and guitar was coming in. But when I had gotten the guitar, I had it for maybe 2 months, and this was a folk, it was actually a rented acoustic guitar. My parents didn't want to buy one until they saw that I was going to get into it. My parents weren't musical or anything. I just was on my own. And the Beatles came on TV for the first time. The Beatles took over the world in 1964. It seemed like. I mean, there was nothing else for a kid. And that was right when I started to learn, C, F, G. I learned those songs, and that was the tops and pops. And that was a great period because it was the Beatles, and great songs, and also the Beach Boys were doing better songs. It wasn't just surf. And there was Motown was big. There was a lot of, and there was all this great R&B. So this was all stuff on the radio that I was into, and that's how I started.
It seemed like that always stayed with you. The part that's not the jazz nerd, clean toned, the bending, the blue. I mean,
Yeah, I
you're
didn't
by
start
far
playing
one of
that
the.
way. Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean,
I don't know anyone that can play the blues like you.
well, man, I was an obnoxious little blues purist as a kid. When I was like 15, I was a blues fanatic. I had a solid body guitar. I was trying to play the blues. And I had those records, Otis Rush and Albert King, BB King,
Yeah.
my favorite. I loved those guys, and that's what I tried to play like, and I was unsuccessful. I don't think I could do it. But I wanted to do it. And then and I heard Jimi Hendrix, when I was more like 16, 17 maybe, and he played at this big concert. I went to hear him, and that was right when I was starting to learn jazz, right? Uh, and I heard Hendrix, and I said, "Man, that stuff he is so great at that. Maybe I'll just be a jazz player because if I just practice." Maybe I can get it together. But
No,
I already had my little,
that
Jimi Hendrix.
that's not true. You're just being modest because, first of all, I think that you're by far one of the greatest blues players on any instrument that ever lived. I mean, any album of
I
yours.
believe in the blues. I really do. I mean, I don't hold any music above that. And that's
I also think that like as I'm getting seriously into vinyl and a lot of the old Blue Note stuff, I just did an interview for the Gibson channel, the guitar thing, and they asked what do I think, what's the difference between jazz and blues, and I said there's no difference. There's no jazz without blues.
it's
Any
black
jazz
music.
that doesn't have that. I
It's
mean,
black music. That's
you
where
go
it
to a
came
jam
from.
session.
Huh?
You go to a jam session. If you cannot hang on a blues or on changes, then that's kind of it for you. I mean,
Yeah. it's look, we have to look at where this music came from, jazz and blues, and the blues inflection and the rhythm of jazz and all this. It came from the African American music from years and years ago, and that just permeated America and the world, the music of the world, really. It went
Yeah.
everywhere, and we have to give it its due. Um, and you can't. I mean, we try to separate blues and rockabilly and whatever, everything, but everything bleeds into other stuff. Uh, some interesting stuff. They say, there are these records by Robert Johnson, the old blues guy, right? And they say that in his repertoire, he played like standards. He would play George Gershwin tunes and stuff.
Wow.
He had
Wow.
to play at dances, I mean, I know he wasn't using any hip 2/5s. I don't know, maybe he was. But when they recorded him, they didn't want to hear that. The record company wanted him to play down home blues because that's what they could sell. It was, I guess, trying to sell to a black audience at that time that wanted to hear the old kind of blues music. And so he didn't record. So he did a lot more stuff than he was allowed to do on those recordings. I think that's interesting, that we all bleed over into just music.
That's not surprising to me, and I think you're the perfect example of that. From jamming with the Grateful Dead or whoever for one night, and then playing. Uh, uh, I think that was just a hit when you played. The last couple albums. It's country music. It's
Yeah.
just so much. The breadth is just so wide.
Well,
And
there's a lot. I'm not an expert in country music or in blues, really. And what we can do is just take this music and put our own thing on it, and just have it be a project that's a little different from the last one. But I'm a fan of all that music, and I know, you being from Israel, that there's so much Eastern music. I mean, the music that comes out of the Middle East is unbelievable, and it's related to blues because it went down into North Africa, and the string sounds, and all that. There's so much that we can all draw on.
Yeah, I think in Israel you cannot escape it. It's in the air.
Yeah.
That sound,
Yeah.
very much so. But I actually my dad is the principal percussionist for Israel Philharmonic. So when I was like 4-year-old toddler, they would take me to rehearsals, or like I kind of grew up on that side of things.
Yeah, incredible, man. To be around
Like,
the orchestra.
yeah,
Oh my God.
yeah. When I moved to New York and I realized that I just know so many symphonies and concertos by heart, just because it was kind of like a folklore in the house.
That's so beautiful, man. All that music inside you, That's so great.
And it was really it was an incredible gift to be
Yeah.
able to grow up in a house where harmony is a thing. It's not harmony is not a 2-chord thing.
Yeah.
And counterpoint is you kind of you have counterpoint for dinner.
Yeah.
And it kind of, I think that part, the counterpoint part, as well as the falling grace aspect of mystery and circular ideas, I
Harmony.
think kind of defined my future for me.
That's incredible. I didn't know that, but you're very lucky to have had that.
I'm so lucky. They're also amazing parents, my parents.
Yeah.
So I want to ask for. I kind of brought up some other records. I think we kind of talked about the Sonny Rollins part, and we talked about the Joe Henderson one. I'm not going to bring up Miles again, but things that I don't think people necessarily associate with you, but I find it big time. One is the Ornette Coleman band.
Oh, yeah.
That I always felt had a very strong
Yeah,
influence on
absolutely.
you.
Well, I mean, so when I was going to Berkeley and stuff, there would be this other kind of music, free jazz, that was an extension of bebop, right? That's what the Ornette Coleman group was, and I had an Ornette Coleman record. When I was like 16, I started on my own buy jazz records, and I came from a little town in Connecticut. It wasn't hip, but there was a nice record store a couple of towns away, and somehow I heard about Ornette Coleman, and I bought his "Shape of Jazz to Come" album, and I
I
didn't even,
always pull that one out.
you know that one, and
Of course.
I didn't know that it was, that there were no changes and that they were playing quote unquote free. I just loved the songs and the feel of it, and that music has always been really interesting to me. So I love those songs, and so I went to school at Berkeley when I was 18, and I used to go at the jazz workshop, and we heard the Keith Jarrett Quartet, which played
Ah,
very much out of that thing with Paul Motion and
that was
Charlie Hayden.
that was my next question.
Yeah, well, I used to go down and hear those guys a bunch, and I love that band as well. And then
And I can hear it. That's why I pulled it out. I can really hear that. What was it like seeing that band live? Like
it
at the
was it
time?
was breathtaking, you know. And I wore out their records, and Joe Lovano did too, and all of us that went to Berkeley at that time, Billy Drews and Kenny Werner, and all, a bunch of us that were huge fans of Ornette had been around for a while at that point, and it had been like 10 years of Ornette Coleman Quartet, but it was still together, and he was playing still with Blackwell and Don Cherry and Dewey Redman in quartet. That was right. It wasn't Don Cherry at that point. It was Dewey Redman and Charlie Hayden, and they would still come, and I could hear those guys in clubs at the Jazz Workshop, and to hear Keith's group. And Keith was, this incredible talent that had come from the Charles Lloyd band, where everybody had heard him, and then was doing his own thing, and ECM Records was starting, and uh,
And
great.
I strongly felt that that band focused on an original sound and coming up with a lot of compositions to kind of see
Yeah,
that sound progress. And all,
Keith wrote such great music, and it's very,
yeah,
some of it's really jazz rock. Some of it's
yeah,
really gospely, and his version of that kind of funky. I mean, he was like Ramsey Lewis combined with Paul Bley. And
yeah, yeah.
I
Well,
mean, that's a terrible thing to say, because he was his own thing. He is his own thing, and but there was that funk in there, and that he had been influenced by all this other music besides just bebop.
and I felt that your group, especially the mythical ones, the trio and the quartet, had the same focus on it. Had a sense of danger to it compared to the music at the time, especially, and a sense of urgency, but also a lot of focus on composition and how your voice as a composer evolves.
Well, yeah, I really wanted to write, and actually, I realized that was the way you got a group to sound like a group, was by writing, so uh, Steve Swallow was always my friend. I met him, like I said, in the early 70s, and he made me write. He almost, forced me. He said, I had written some tune, and he said, this is pretty good. If you worked on this, you might be able to write tunes. And so I did. And he would actually bother me. He would, like, did you write, how many tunes have you written? Oh, you need to write more. No, that's not enough. More. You need to write more. And and so yeah, I wrote for all those groups in the 80s and 90s, and after. I would write music, and I found that if you just work at it, you can get something to play, and I loved tunes like all of us. I loved uh Ornette and Keith's writing, but I loved Monk, and Wayne Shorter, those guys, and Steve Swallow's writing, and all the really great composers of jazz.
So I want to ask you for a sec about that process of writing for you. Like, what is it? What is it like? You sit with a
Well,
guitar, with a pencil, with
yeah, with a guitar and a pencil. And you know what, Dekel? I've been so lazy, I can't play piano. I can play like one G7, that's like with, like a guitar voicing and play maybe a blues scale. I can't voice on the piano. Um,
I actually studied piano in high school,
oh,
and then I did one gig on piano, and then as the years go by, I'm regressing.
yeah, you're getting
Meaning,
worse.
of course,
Well,
I realized that the guitar is going to take a lifetime, and I'd rather be mediocre at one thing than totally suck at two things.
yeah. Well, I think, for arranging and writing, it would probably really help me to get some basic keyboard chops like that. I'm sure you already have. But
No, no,
all
I
the
really
music,
don't.
but it turns out you can write music on the guitar, and that's what I do. I just write
So
on.
all those Ned Rosenberg parts were all you written that on guitar.
Yeah, all of it.
Uh, so you sit and you play until you like something and then you let it develop. Like what's the
Yeah,
process?
that's what I've always done, and lately it's even. I believe in improvisation even more. I just sit down and it really helps me to have an idea for the kind of tune I want to write. I want to write a ballad, I want to write a waltz, I want to write a funk tune, I want to write. So then I sit down and I go through some stuff that's it, and I have my phone now and I record it right away. And then I just, oh, that's no good. What? Oh, that's and then, oh, maybe that's okay. And then I listen to it. But I'm talking about like two chords or something, and then I find something that I want to keep, and I write down the three chords and the little melody, and I write it down, and then I work on the next part. But it comes uh, uh, out of improvisation, all of it, and if I slow it down too much, I forget it right away.
And is that mostly on acoustic or electric or what
It's
is it
just
like?
on the same old jazz guitar, not plugged in.
And another question: what when you say I believe in improvisation now even more than ever? What do you mean by that? Like,
Well, I think that maybe part of, the great jazz message is that we all know this intuitively, that if you're speaking, sometimes just in speaking language, that when you're talking, an idea will form and then you say it as it's forming. And sometimes you can get to the real feeling and to a real truth or something in conversation with somebody like that. And that's what we do when we improvise music. And it comes out better than if you write it down. If you labor over it over and over again, then you lose something that is some freshness and beauty that comes from improvisation. And I think improvisation is really a absolute, human thing that everybody can understand, and we all do it, and it's part of being a human being, and it's part of being in the time continuum, of this thing that's happening to us all in life. And and that's what the great thing is, that now we can record and hear our little thoughts that we had, and we can hear the great jazz musicians, and we don't need to write it down. You can write it down afterwards if the idea was any good, and and I'm sure Mozart and Beethoven wrote like that too. They just got really fast at writing stuff down, and then would labor over certain things without. And there's the architecture of those people, was incredible, and it's not to take away from that at all. And and who wants to listen to all our endless solos after a while? There's a point there, but there's something that happens. And and Miles, when he would hit it, I don't know, pretty great.
and do you ever before a session of your own music, do you rehearse do you like practice the tunes on your
Oh yeah,
own or you
to death, to death. I practice it probably way too much. because what else are you going to do? Yeah, I run through the changes. I play the tune over and over. We're going to do a live broadcast tomorrow. Me and Steve.
I know. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, listen, man, I haven't played in 6 months, a gig. For my whole life, I've been playing gigs. Since 1975, I've been on the road. This is the most I've been home since then. So I've been just trying to practice, but it's not the same as when you
That's
play.
the same.
And so I'm so nervous because I don't know, I know I'm out of shape, but what the hell? Here we go.
But isn't that a gift after all these years to be nervous about walking, to have goosebumps about walking on stage?
Yeah, I guess it's a gift. I'd rather just be completely confident, to tell you the truth.
I'll take that. I'll take that. So before I'm letting you go, what's next? You always seem to have a few things. I was hoping there's going to be a solo album. You did a solo
I
tour.
have been working on solo. Played some solo gigs in Europe and a little bit in the States, and it's been fun because I never wanted to do that, and I play with a looper, some of it's with my I have the boomerang where you can't store a loop, which is good because if I stored them, I'd have all kinds of worked out stuff. But I really enjoyed these last solo gigs in the last times I've done it. So yeah, maybe I'll do a.
I missed you at the Zigzag. You played at the new Zigzag.
The Zigzag, yeah.
The new one. I missed it in a week. I was out of town. Well, I was so looking forward to seeing that.
I'll probably be back. Once they have the Zigzag comes back, I'll be back doing solo gigs.
Yeah,
and I've been enjoying that, and that's been a new thing for me. I don't know what's next, Dekel. I don't have a master plan for this next thing. I've got a group of guys that I was gonna do some stuff with next spring, and I'm still gonna do it. It's on the books. We've just never done it. I was gonna arrange a bunch of rock tunes, and I got a nice bunch of guys, to play with that are not quite exactly all about jazz. They're into some different stuff, and John Coward, the keyboard player.
Yeah.
Vicente Archer, the great bass player who played in my Combo 66 group. You know? And so we're working on some stuff, and I want to do a bunch of rock classics, but I've also been writing some music that's not really straight ahead, and we'll see what happens with that. We're going to tour next spring. Next summer, I guess.
I always felt that you knew how to pick guys that weren't necessarily like you recorded with Omar Hakim or the record with Steve Jordan. I love that record.
Oh, thank you. Well, those guys are master musicians. They're so great. Both Omar and Steve. And Steve Jordan's unbelievable, man. I mean, I did the stuff I've done with him, and the last time I did last year, did a gig that he invited me to do. It was a tribute to B.B. King, and he had all these. He's a producer, he had all these singers. It was him and Pino Palladino on bass. They were the rhythm section. I just stood there next to them on stage behind the curtain and listened to how intense the beauty of them just playing a groove, on one song after song.
He also produced That's What I Say album?
He produced that. Steve did. He really kind of put that together with me, but he had so much to do with that, He got all the singers and.
And what does it mean to bring like when you guys, after you played for so many years with the trio, when you work, so you did this tracking for the last album, and it's an ECM album that was basically produced by you.
Yeah, but Manfred heard it and wanted to put it out. So in that way, he did produce it. He actually put together the sequence, which is always important. I can never do that,
Yeah.
And yeah.
So John, thanks so much for coming. I'm celebrating. This series is about celebrating my new album. I'm so happy to steal all of your shit on it and get away with it.
Get out of here. We all steal each other's stuff. That's what jazz is all about. That's what George Benson told me. he said, "Don't play anything hip because I'll steal it. I'll steal it right away." You know.
John, it's so great to see you again. Thanks so much for joining me. Send my best to Susan. Stay safe.
Absolutely, and thank you, Dekel, for picking me. And good luck with your new record. And it's great that it's coming out.
Thanks so much. Means so much to me. We'll see you real soon. Next week we have Terrell Carrington. If you shared the album, we're giving this vinyl away, courtesy of ECM Records. So share the stream. And John, I'll hope to see you in person real soon.
I hope so, Dekel. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.